Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. And it is time once again for a Monday morning Murph. And let me tell you, Murph, at about, I don't know, 1:15 yesterday, I was probably thinking Monday morning Murph is going to be pretty gnarly of a conversation between us. And boy, did things change over about the next hour and a half of Vikings Falcons as Josh Dobbs comes in off the street, essentially, sort of, from Arizona, learns enough of the offense. He's taught enough of the offense by Kevin O'Connell and his headset, by his fellow teammates, to come away with a victory in Atlanta to move this team to 5-4 and looking like they have a chance to be a playoff team. Lay it out for me. What do you got, Murph? What was your reaction to what we saw yesterday with Josh Dobbs?
That was a lot of fun. It was just very, very entertaining, dicey, uncertain, unpredictable, messy through most of it. It's going to continue to be messy. Um, but as a snapshot in time goes, that might have been one of the most. It's certainly since I've been here for 24 years, the most improbable, unpredictable Vikings game outcome. Now, the stakes weren't as high as some of the other big improbable, uncertain, crazy outcomes that they've been a part of their entire history. But as far as what you saw unfold from the first quarter to there were 22 seconds left in the game, nobody would have scripted anything remotely close to that. I mean, look, the Vikings were preparing a rookie quarterback, a fifth round quarterback all week last week. You know, Jalen Hall. Let's just get him familiar. Let's triage. Let's get him in a position to make a play and stay out of trouble. Unfortunately, he goes down in the first quarter with a vicious concussion. Um, there's a guy that just isn't used to running in the open field in the NFL and learned a very difficult lesson at the goal line yesterday. But suddenly you have the move that they made last week, to get Dobbs from Arizona, which was prudent. Maybe a little bit of a wink and a nod toward the future, but certainly, a move that was made for the present, but not that much of the present. And to watch that unfold, and then to hear the comments that you heard come out of the locker room. I'm thinking of Brian O'Neill, the right tackle. He says, "Yeah, I met the guy on Thursday. I was in the huddle with him for the first time on the first snap." Dobbs barely knew anyone's names, let alone the playbook, let alone, that there was that scene of all the offensive line gathered around him as he was about to take the field, taking a snap just so they could hear his voice and what it sounds like when he's calling out the plays. It was triage at the highest level. And to watch Kevin O'Connell sort of shepherd Dobbs through some really, really devastating moments early on, taking a safety, fumbling deep in your own zone, looking lost and unable to find anything downfield. A lot of happy feet. But boy, when you've got speed and talent and athleticism, happy feet can get you out of a lot of trouble. And it certainly, not only got Dobbs out of trouble, but bailed the Vikings out. And now, oh, by the way, they're 5-4, having won four straight. Absolutely incredible.
And I think the sample size is growing now from not just last year, where it was a magical, crazy year that everybody acknowledged a lot of things went their way, but there was another part of it too that they were never out of any game. Even when they were down 33 points, they were never out of any game. And to me, that's a lot on the coaching and what they've been able to do as a coaching staff to have these players in position to never give up, to never, and not that NFL players usually just roll over or anything like that, but to continue that fight, to make a tackle on the 1 yard line that saves a touchdown, as opposed to giving up the field goal, which kept them in the game early and made them feel like, all right, that strip sack wasn't that big of a deal. It was just a fumble, and we'll move on. But if it had been a touchdown on numerous occasions, if they had allowed one more first down or one time for them to blast through into the end zone, or if they don't cause a fumble or dive into the pile like Josh Metellus did to rip the ball away at the bottom of the pile, then none of this ends up coming to fruition. And that's what really stuck out to me, Murph. And what I wrote about was it really took everybody. And I think that's what Kevin O'Connell was so proud of, that he's always got this team playing together, caring about each other, fighting until the end, like all those kind of cliches that until you see another team that's not well coached in Atlanta, or what we saw last year from Indianapolis when a guy came from the ESPN set, to that game. Like it really stands out when you see it, the juxtaposition between how the Vikings were in that game and how the Falcons were in that game. And I think it really speaks highly of the head coach. I guess your reaction to the way that Kevin O'Connell managed them through what looked like it was going to be a complete disaster after Dobbs came in.
I mean, he's literally hand-holding him in the headset throughout the day, trying to translate the terminology the Vikings use into terms that he could understand from, I don't know, one of the previous 6 organizations he's been with. Some things probably clicked, others didn't. You had the offensive line, you had the running backs kind of, shepherding him along each series call as well. It really is a testament to the job that O'Connell's done because we talked all last season about all the golden horseshoes that kept raining down on this team and seemed to anoint them as unicorns. But there was a lot of adversity that they had faced too. It wasn't just simply crazy plays at crazy moments. I mean, there were. I mean, they were down against Indianapolis. They were really down and out against Buffalo. I mean, we go down the laundry list of the double doink things that happened all through that season last year. But it's one thing to get gifted things; it's another thing to take advantage of it and also create a belief. And so much of what O'Connell was doing last year was really putting a tourniquet on all the emotional and mental wounds that came out of the Zimmer era. Toward the end of the bitter Mike Zimmer era, left a lot of that locker room battle scarred and skeptical. So not only was he able to, take advantage of the opportunities that fell the Vikings' way to power themselves to 13 victories, but he also elevated Cousins to a new level of production and respect that he didn't have playing, I guess, fearing not to lose and not to anger Zimmer. Now you look at what he's been able to put together with his body of work now through 9 games this year. I mean, you fall 0-3 and look awful doing it. You end up 1-4, losing to the Super Bowl champs. You lose your star wide receiver. Oh, by the way, the Vikings went 4-0 without Justin Jefferson. That's not something to be dismissed. And then we're going to talk about all the decisions that O'Connell has made and is going to continue to make with Dobbs. But the big key to me too is hiring Brian Flores, because what Brian Flores has been able to do defensively is not only resurrect that unit, but give them a belief that if we're not producing offensively, if we're we got a laundry list of injuries we can go down and deal with as well. But that defense, they have found ways to make critical plays at key moments. You mentioned the goal line stand, the turnovers they were able to force. Look, Taylor Heineke was just asking to be picked off all afternoon, and he finally was by Byron Murphy Jr. But the timing of the turnovers that they created, the first Atlanta series after falling behind 21-13, that could have been a death knell, even if the Falcons only put up 3 or drain more clock. But boom, on that first series, the Vikings suddenly have the ball in positive territory. Suddenly they're turning that into points. And, it's contagious. You talk about it being a cliche, and it can be overstated that the guy play for the guy next to you, the love of your band of brothers. You're all down and wounded and counted out, rally together. I mean, a lot of that is bulletin board material, but a lot of it is legitimate too. And when you're part of a team that's going through extremely challenging and difficult times through no fault of your own or a lot of fault of your own, and your leader is able to make you believe either through positive reinforcement or actually doing the job, i.e., getting Dobbs competent enough to play on the fly in real time, I mean, that instills a lot of confidence in the room. So you can tell these guys are playing for each other. They're playing complementary football. There's so much uncertainty. We have no idea where this is going. But, considering what the team and fan base probably felt just a week ago today compared to what they feel now, it may be a flash in the pan victory. There's going to be headaches along the way. There's going to be more errors along the way. It's not going to be clean football. But if they're all pulling an equal amount of rope and they're doing it for each other and they're doing just enough to win, the schedule here opens up wide for them to take advantage and stockpile some wins. And look, the NFC is pretty wide open beyond Philly right now. So where this goes, no one knows.
And I want to get to that of whether Josh Dobbs just saved their season or just provided us one really fun, shining moment that will be fleeting. We'll talk about that in a second. But just to your point, I think that when we talk about coaching, a lot of times it's on micro decisions within games. So we'll say, oh, well, he didn't go for two, or what are they doing on this fourth down play call, or why didn't they punt, or whatever. We kind of analyze coaching through that lens. But the more, I guess, difficult way to do it is trying to figure out, one, how do your players respond to things that go wrong? And also, how can you make the most of what you have? And this is where the coaching staff, I think, for the Vikings is really exceptional. Not just Josh Dobbs, but I mean, it is incredible to be translating in your brain as you're sending in play calls. All right, Josh, this play call here is called F right wing, whatever, X22. You probably know it as Western Southern 4761. And because Kevin O'Connell has this breadth of knowledge as a former quarterback, and someone who's constantly studying the game, constantly talking to everybody else in the league, other coaches and everything else, but has such this incredible experience that he can do that on the fly. And to have your head coach be able to do that and not just have an assistant or something else is, I think, super valuable. I mean, how many head coaches are over there breaking down? You had saw him pantomiming, like, here's what you want to look for, and like he's holding a fake ball kind of thing on the sideline trying to teach it. But to have the head guy
And
doing it,
doing like footwork drills.
right. Yes, right. On the fly. And to be able to teach it and to be the guy who's guiding the quarterback and have the quarterback be an extension of him at that point, but also all the other players who had to help him as well. And what we saw was lots of different guys step up at different times. The running game was terrible. And then Cam Akers breaks off a 20-yard run that makes a big difference. Brandon Powell catches the ball in the end zone. Brandon Powell's a punt returner. This guy has barely ever caught any passes. I mean, he was like a little bit of a receiver last year for the Rams. Now he's a key receiver for them. David Quessenberry, they traded for this guy or signed this guy right before the beginning of the season, just as extra depth on the offensive line. Now, all of a sudden, he shows up at the stadium and he's starting when he never would have expected that. And we see the same thing on the defensive side. No one had ever heard of Ivan Pace Jr., he's an undrafted free agent, and now he's making plays in this game against one of the best running teams in the NFL. And you have a lot of defensive linemen and things like this. If you looked at the number of players who played snaps for the defense yesterday, it's like 18 guys are getting on the field on the defensive side. And to me, that's where you see the coaching is not only how the players like respond and gel together with each other, but also how do you make the most out of every single guy here? And there was no better example than that from Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores. Folks, we are going all in on prize picks this football season. Every week, we are playing and testing out our skills here on Purple Insider to see if we can predict what numbers players will put up every Sunday. If you haven't heard of it, trust me, you're going to want to check it out. Prize picks is the easiest and best way to play daily fantasy. Instead of battling against thousands of other players and people who spend their entire lives doing fantasy, all you do is pick more or less on between 2 and 6 player stat projections. So say a quarterback's number is 250.5 yards, go more or less and bang, you are playing. And you can pick from hundreds of players and numbers this football season. The cool thing is that it's quick and easy and does not cost an arm and a leg. You can turn $10 into 250 just like that. Again, the perfect way to fit it into a busy day. Click, click, and you're playing. This isn't just something that I like. You're going to hear us doing every single week, Prize Picks on the show on Purple Insider. So go to prizepicks.com/purple and use the code PURPLE for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/purple with the code PURPLE. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
Yeah, and you touched upon this. I think it's a good point for. I mean, I think the public knows this, but even if they don't, that like we're all watching the game just like the fans are. I'm at home watching TV. You're watching on TV. Occasionally, we're in the stadium. This is where we get to see real time, high pressure decision making by your head coach. But the other 90% of his job, none of us see. I mean, we ask people, we try to find out. Back in the day when I was in the locker room, you're trying to get a sense of, are these guys just spewing platitudes? Are they saying what they know their boss wants to hear? Or do they actually believe what's coming out of his mouth? And that's what I think we don't know all of the effort that went last week, at least what it looked like, just to get Jalen Ward ready for this game. But there was no contingency for having Josh Dobbs in this game. And there might have been not even have been a contingency this week if Ward had played well to get Dobbs into a game. This could be a several week kind of an emergency process that played out within less than 15 minutes into their first game together with their two new backup quarterbacks. So I'm interested, and I think the Vikings have done a really good job. Every team is doing this now, of posting the post game videos, the speeches in the locker room. And look, there's been a lot of wins. The Vikings have had. They've had 18 regular season wins under this guy. So there's been a lot of those kind of aha behind the curtain moments that reveal a lot about somebody's leadership style, somebody, how men kind of, rise to the occasion for each other and are willing and capable of following somebody wherever they go. You see all that in the raw footage of those 5-minute post-game speeches. But to watch Jalen Hurts come into that, or sorry about that, Josh Dobbs come into that locker room yesterday, it was really, look, I didn't get misty or anything, but that was a really cool thing to see him come into that locker room and get greeted like a conquering hero. As we've said, this could be a snapshot in time. He could be a disaster for several more starts. There could be some costly turnovers that really, really punish the Vikings. And their injury list is really growing and getting cutting, bone deep into their depth. But for this moment, I mean, I don't think you can argue that the Vikings have certainly made the right decision in not only who they want to lead this team, but now who they've got in charge of their defense, and also just watching them kind of rally around each other and come together around an unknown quantity, like Josh Dobbs, was kind of heartening to see. And this is why we tune in. I mean, this is what it's about. It's about seeing things you never expect to see, seeing how people react to adversity, how they rise to the occasion or fail to rise to the occasion. It's why we tune in every week. It's the greatest form of unscripted entertainment, with a week to build up and a week to tear down. So we can all bask in the Dobbs phenomenon today, but then the injury report's going to come out, and now it's going to be another, how do you get him ready in not just real time on the sidelines, but now that you've got a little bit more time, what exactly is he going to be able to absorb? What's your game plan going to look like? And really, after 5 years of watching, Cousins kind of like a statue in the pocket, deliver some beautiful passes, put up some great numbers, and absorb some really wicked hits, what's it going to be like now to have a dual threat? What's O'Connell going to be able to unwrap in his gift box to see what this offense can be? You got Jefferson coming back. Addison's obviously been ascending all season. Hawkinson's banged up. Osborne's banged up, but now Brandon Powell has emerged as a playmaker. So Akers may be out. We can go through all the injuries here in a minute, but I just think there's so many moving parts and so much uncertainty that it's both exciting, daunting, and look, they may end up winning 3 more games, or they could win, another 6 and turn this into not just a lost season that they salvaged, but a potentially potent one in January.
And that's what I want to talk about next. But just to respond to what you're saying, this win, no matter what happens going forward, will resonate for a long time about the coaching staff and about both sides, about Brian Flores as well, which people are already asking, like, he's going to earn himself a head coaching job, isn't he? And the answer is maybe. We'll see. I don't know about that. I don't know how the rest of the NFL and their owners are feeling about hiring him as a head coach, and could be to the Vikings' benefit if they are holding a grudge
Yeah,
against
I mean,
someone,
he's still
right?
suing the league, so
Right.
let's
Yeah.
let's be let's acknowledge that they may not be willing to hire him right away.
Right. But you can also see why the man was successful in Miami and turned around their defense as well, because he is made for a massive change here. And then, of course, O'Connell empowering the leaders of the team the way that he did to rally around Josh Dobbs, I think really, really shines here. So even if this doesn't go great to the end of the season because you are playing a backup quarterback, and yeah, the schedule is easier, but look at the end of the schedule when you play Detroit twice and you play Cincinnati, that looks like a legitimate Super Bowl contender after beating Buffalo last night. Like, it's not going to be a cakewalk to the end. There are two more, divisional games even against Chicago and Green Bay, which regardless, they tend to split even when those teams aren't that good. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But this one will be memorable for my impression and my analysis of Kevin O'Connell going forward. Now let's talk about the other part of it. KJ Osborne was hurt pretty seriously. You don't want to see him come back right away. Cam Akers tore his Achilles. That's likely a season-ending injury. Feel terrible for him. He seemed to have really assimilated well into this team after whatever happened in Los Angeles. What is realistic in your mind? Did Josh Dobbs save the season and potentially set up for something magical here? Or are we getting too ahead of ourselves after a 3-point win where a lot of stuff, the interceptions and goal line stands where they had to do everything under the sun to make that happen?
Yes, and yes. Though that's the short answer. Yes, he did salvage the season at this very moment. And yes, there was a lot to not like in that game, to not like in the widening and deepening injury report that makes this, it could be, a fool's errand to think that this is going to spark some magical run. I mean, there was a lot of feel good vibes, but there's still a lot of practical problems that are confronting this team. All of that being said, what gives me, uh, the most confidence that they can ride this a bit is because, and by my rudimentary math, I mean, their next four opponents are 14-21 collectively. So that's a 40% winning percentage. Not much there. So if they can make some hay with that, and then of course you got to go to Cincinnati, and you do have two games out of the last three against the division front runner Detroit. So this is not going to be a cakewalk, but you can build up an awful lot of equity and a lot of capital in the next several weeks against opponents you should be able to beat. Doesn't mean you're even going to be favored to beat, but should be able to defeat. Again, what are they going to do with their depth? What are they going to be able to do with the lineup? How are they going to reintegrate Jefferson? Is Jefferson coming off IR this week? Is it worth being a little more prudent with him? Because we all know how wonky hamstring injuries can be. Uh, I'm sure he's chomping at the bit to get a taste of this new offensive look. Um, Watching him and Addison really work as a tandem now, as opposed to one hand or the other hand, will be fascinating to watch. The running game continues to really not do much, and now they've lost Akers. I don't know what's salvageable there. Madison, either the line blocking just isn't working or he's just not finding the holes, but it just doesn't seem to be working the way they thought it would when they said, he can replace Dalvin Cook. So there's still a lot here. We know that. Defensively, they're one or two blown assignments from having a game blow up in their face. And let's not forget they were facing Taylor Heineke yesterday. Just as they were facing the Gong Show in Chicago, just as they were facing Bryce Young in Carolina. They haven't exactly, they weren't able to beat Mahomes. They weren't able to beat Justin Herbert. And, they've got Joe Burrow staring at them at some point here too. So there's a lot there to question. But I think that's what makes it so intriguing to watch, is that it's really going to be difficult to kind of handicap, because it's going to be such a week by week, series by series, opponent by opponent evaluation on what they're going to be able, to do with Dobbs, what he can bring to the table that gives them a new look and a new dynamic that teams really can't scout for. They can scout his tape, obviously, with his 7 organizations and his work with with Arizona, but the Cardinals are terrible. The Vikings are not. So I feel like, in some ways the Vikings are kind of stumbling around a little bit in the dark, but I think their opponents will be too coming up, and they're generally inferior opponents. So I don't think this team was as bad as the 0-3 and 1-4 marks labeled them as, and they've shown in the last month and a half that is the case. Um, I think, you know, belief in each other and momentum are real, and these things, they're hard to quantify and they're hard to, disrupt if they're going well. So I just feel like there's a lot to build off this week that just gives the team a real chance to reset both schematically but also emotionally after losing Cousins, and to really, they wake up this morning and suddenly they're one win over 500. They actually have a winning record. I don't think anybody thought that was possible 6 weeks ago.
No, and I think that that was fair not to, even with the schedule. I mean, beating San Francisco and then being able to carry it over and not have the letdown game and then fight through this, very, very impressive. It is hard for a team to have the most emotional victory every week, though. Like I mean, think what they've gone through the last 3 weeks, and this is what I wonder about for projecting the rest of the season. There's a couple things that make me think that they can do this. Jefferson coming back at some point is one of them. The way that Josh Dobbs found ways to produce first downs, even if something went wrong, or even if he didn't know the play, he just ran for it. Which imagine. But I mean, that Flores's defense, I think Flores's defense could keep them in any game against pretty much any opponent, even when we're talking about those better teams. And in the NFL, if you could stay close, you can have a chance, right? All you need is Bijan Robinson to have the ball popped out, and then all of a sudden you've got a chance to win if your defense can keep the game close. But I do wonder about San Francisco on Monday Night Football. That is a hugely emotional win for them. They go to Green Bay, they lose their starting quarterback, and then they come to Atlanta and have this. And so 3 weeks in a row, they've been a major national story. They've been at the center of the spotlight. They've had these crazy emotional wins, and they've also gotten beat up. Like you saw TJ Hawkinson in this game just sort of surviving his way to the end of the game. But that man was banged up. He had an ankle injury earlier this year. Now he's got whatever happened to his midsection that he was able to stay in the game. Osborne is hurt. Who knows about Christian Darrisaw's status going forward, if he's going to be in and out or if he's going to get back to 100%. The defense is healthy at the moment, but if you have some injuries there, where do you stand? So there's a lot of roadblocks in the way for a team that has to have crazy week in, week out. It's like the cardiac kids of what was that, the Cleveland Browns, the one year where they had all these crazy wins and then eventually it came crashing down. Kind of happened to the Vikings last year in the second half
It
of the
did.
season, where they came crashing down in Green Bay and then they played the Giants and obviously came up short there. That it's just hard to live. And the all-time example is Minneapolis Miracle to Philadelphia. It's just hard to live on 10 out of 10 for a whole season where you never have like an easy week. And I don't know if that's this week. I don't know when that will happen, but I do think that regardless of that, this team has the will to keep going and the culture, if you will, to keep going, the coaching to keep going, and a quarterback who can make a play here or there. And I think the more he learns, the better he should get, considering the offensive setup they have. A lot of the passes that he threw were to open receivers, because this is like what Kirk Cousins has been doing, is throwing to a lot of open receivers that are either really talented or schemed up really well. So I don't think it's unreasonable to look at the playoffs, especially with the NFC, and say, this could be one of those years that we remember forever, where Josh Dobbs showed up in a trade for a pick swap in the. I mean, he's already made the trade worth it just today. Like the pick swap, more than worth it. You won the trade already just by getting a win out of that. And I think that he's got enough talent and experience to at least grind them the rest of the way. I think you only need 9 wins to get in the playoffs, and it feels like they're going to get there.
Yeah, it feels like they're going to get to 9. The question is, can they get to 10 or 11, which maybe buys you a home game, although that didn't necessarily play out as they expected last year against the Giants. But, you know, the emotional maturity that the team has kind of, I think, experienced extends to last year. I mean, that, they faced adversity. They faced this sort of week to week living on the edge mentality that we all, embraced because it was so fun to watch. But you're right. I think there was a toll that they ended up paying, and they did pay it at the end because they just weren't able to rise against a really, as it looks today, a really inferior New York Giants team that you needed to beat at home to really put the bow on that season of joy, so to speak, last year. But now it's been tested the opposite way. I mean, they've had to fight for everything. They've had to hammer and tong their way back into contention, and that's not easy to do when not only are you lose your star wide receiver, but then you end up losing your starting quarterback right at the moment that he had sort of galvanized the locker room. Or really, you could tell even pregame, these guys were wearing all those graphic T-shirts yesterday in Atlanta, honoring Cousins, just because I think there's a real deep respect and appreciation for how he's evolved as a player and as a leader under O'Connell. And I think that the team really was devastated to lose their sort of alpha. And so now you've got a guy they're just starting to get to know, but what a first impression, and what a way to kind of ingratiate yourself to an uncertain locker room by stepping into an impossible situation, and for your head coach to not shy away from that impossible situation. I mean, it would have been, look, if the Vikings got rolled yesterday, we would have understood it. I mean, you would have almost empathized with the terrible hand that O'Connell was dealt late in that first quarter. But instead, I mean, they turn it around and they gain confidence. And look, Atlanta's not a great team. They're good defense, not a great team, poorly coached. I mean, Arthur Smith's, unhinged meltdown against Kurt Warner last week just tells you everything you need to know about his leadership skills. I don't see O'Connell losing his locker room like that. Or look at Josh McDaniel in Vegas and what a mess that is. O'Connell, I think, has as much political capital right now than he may have in a long time. Same with the general manager. I mean, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did not afford himself too well in his first draft, and you can nitpick some of the decisions he's made there, but to say, look, we're not going to throw in the towel on the season. We're going to essentially swap picks for a guy that looks like Arizona's ready to kick to the curb again. That was not the move made last week. Was not made to start against the Falcons. But suddenly now Dobbs is that guy. And you see a little bit of chatter out there about, well, if Ward's okay, and which, look, concussion, I don't know if he's going to be on the field Wednesday, but even if he is back on the field Wednesday, I think you'd have a hard time handing this team back to him after what Dobbs did on Sunday. I think this is Dobbs' team going forward, no matter, warts and all. And it's going to be interesting to see how this team in this town sort of rally around a guy who's going to be flawed going forward. We know that. And how much leeway is he going to have in terms of understanding and empathy? This kind of win on that kind of stage and that kind of moment kind of buys a lot of that time. But he's got to keep producing. They got to keep winning. Otherwise, the good vibes, they tend to don't last very long in this league. As Jerry Glanville said, NFL, not for long.
Was he the only one that said that? I feel like I've heard that maybe one or two other times, but no.
He's the first one I think the NFL Films
Was it?
Mike caught it on. So everybody else has been saying it since.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm just kidding. I've probably heard it 10,000 times since, but yeah, I mean, it has the potential to be something that Vikings fans really remember for a very long time. It also has the potential to run out of gas and peter out and have it be that one game that was really fun and that's it. And I guess that's the next challenge for the Vikings that they will face. And then at some point we will get to other conversations about the future of the quarterback and so forth, but I think that's going to have to wait for a little bit to see how this plays out. Murph, always great stuff. Great column, purpleinsider.com. See your reaction to what Josh Dobbs did yesterday, saving the Vikings season, and make sure you go read that there. We will talk again next Monday, and we will only find out what is next for us. Murph, it has been unpredictable as always, so we will talk then.
Saddle up, folks. It's going to be another fun ride.